Welcome back, AP Gov students. Today is Unit 5 review. This will be a collection of all the key terms and notes from each chapter of Keeping the Republic that corresponds to Unit 5. As always, if you don't have Keeping the Republic, it's fine because the content is still going to be the same. I encourage you to follow along and take notes as well. American citizenship, status of being a citizen of the United States, obviously. Most Americans have birthright citizenship, but gaining citizenship is particularly attractive to immigrants and non-immigrants seeking naturalization. What it means to be a citizen isn't really like a big issue or topic in this country, but when it comes to immigration, it definitely is. A big part of immigration policy is setting up the pathways for how to become a citizen and what does it mean at certain levels of citizenship when you have like stuff like a green card and then eventually being a full citizen. But the concept of what is citizenship is more important for Gov than specifically what an American citizen is. U.S. immigration policy, U.S. procedures, and guidelines for immigrants. Deciding who is admitted to the country and how to become a citizen is a critical question, often rooted in national security concerns. The national security part of it is a big part of what is now the Republican platform and the Trump platform, going into like just the last 8 years or so with Trump being around. But the immigration debate dates back a lot longer than just before Trump. A huge part of modern U.S. immigration policy is how to balance being an open country that's open to new people and also being able to have secured borders and not, just letting everyone in. And there's definitely a balancing act that it seems that both sides of the political spectrum, at least right now, can't come to a consensus because there are extreme views on both sides. Political culture, shared values and beliefs about the political world, sets indirect baselines and norms for how the political debate should be conducted, creates a playing field for political ideas. The political culture in the country now is kind of collapsing. I hate to say it. There's a lot of bad political rhetoric and a very high political temperature right now. And in the past maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years. But we still have a firmer political culture than a lot of other places in the world. We don't have a lot of extreme views in the country compared to other places. And we do have a common ideal in what America is and what it should be, and that's a big part of who we are as Americans. Values, normative statements that establish common goals. In America, these values are based on principles of fair processes and treatment, individualism, and self-driven prosperity. So these values come to fruition in our election processes, our economy being a capitalist economy, our society, how we try and uplift each other, but we don't just give people opportunities for free. So these values show their face in a lot of parts of American society and government. Democracy, the procedure to do politics fairly. Giving citizens equal access to conduct politics and influence government creates fair policy outcomes. Setting up a democracy that allows people to control government in a way, allows people to institute their beliefs in government, creates a fair government that represents everyone more equally. Freedom, ability to be free from control. People are free from the state and are allowed to do what they want without undue restriction, both economically and socially. Sometimes the government has to step in to prevent extremes. This is where a little bit of the social contract stuff comes from Chapter 1, where citizens have freedom and ability to do things, but they give up a little bit of that in order for the government to protect them and preserve law and order. But in general, people in America have way more freedom than anyone else in the world, and that's a good thing. Equality, the people are on a fair playing field. Procedural guarantees are given through fair treatment, but this does not guarantee fair results. Equality is a big principle of democracy and capitalism rather than an authoritarian socialist system. However, there are nuances in equality. Total equality doesn't always mean that everyone can survive, and that's where the government steps in to make sure people are getting the help that they need. Ideologies, political belief systems. These belief systems divide people, but common culture prevents either side from becoming radical, and that's where the importance of common political culture and shared values come in, because there are a wide spectrum of political ideologies, far left, far right, center left, center right, and then centrist people. And in order to make sure everyone is on some level on the same page, you have to have that common political culture within the wide spectrum of political ideologies, and that's why our culture collapsing is a huge problem. Conservatives, right-wing political camp, They believe in traditional values, limited government with limited change, maintaining social order and rule of law. These traditional values date back like decades ago, and conservatives are the Republican side of what is American politics. Not all Republicans are traditional conservatives. Trump's not really a traditional conservative in a modern sense. But things like traditional values and limited government are definitely anti-progressive, progressivism being the other side. Liberals, left-wing political camp, they believe in progressivism and social change, expansion of government, broad solutions to social issues, and expansion of individualism. So a lot of this is rooted in like modernizing principles, and that the government can change and adapt constantly to people as the world grows. And this puts a lot of responsibility on the government to be very active in social change and resolving social issues, as opposed to conservative government, where social issues aren't a huge value for the government, and the government shouldn't be pushing people to change and stuff like that. And there are definitely benefits of both sides. Political socialization, the process by which beliefs, values, and political attachments are developed. This is also a little bit of like a sociology term. The process begins at a very early age, where founding institutions like family, school, and religion play the most important role. This is one of the reasons why most people adopt the political values of their family or their community, is because they play the most important role at like not brainwashing them, but just influencing them as a kid. Patriotism, being devoted to one's country. It is a value often attributed to Americans, as it is a common value for most people, not only for their country, but for their community as well. I think it's kind of a funny phenomenon in America, no matter how divided the country is. If anybody from outside of America tries to criticize the United States, people will come together as just their natural devotion to their country. Spiral of silence, unwillingness to express unpopular opinions. It creates a society where the status quo is consistently supported without open avenues for different opinions. It's just the way that people work, is that they are shy most of the time about airing out opinions that they feel are unpopular in the community, and that's part of political socialization. You adopt the views of people around you because you might be afraid to differ. Political generations, groups of people that are shaped by key events. The outbreak of certain events and how they affect society can lead entire generations of people to take similar political perspectives on issues. So you can imagine how the Great Depression might have influenced people's views on economic policy, how the Cold War might have influenced people's views on foreign policy, and maybe most recently, like 9/11, how people feel about national security. And then it's kind of has to be seen later how the COVID generation feels about maybe things like government power, government overreach, things like that. Partisan sorting, people separate themselves based on political party. It serves as both a positive and negative, uniting groups of people around a common view while also dividing people along party lines. People's shared values and how they decide like who their friends are and who their like family members are, things like that. Shared values have a very high tie-in with political views, and that's why partisan sorting happens. So it's good in uniting people based on, common shared values, but it also separates people based on political values and not essentially like core life values. Sample bias, when samples are not representative of the population. It results in polls or surveys that are not accurate and should not be used to define the public viewpoint or predict political outcomes. Random samples, samples that accurately represent the population. If you were in stats class, you would know what all this sample stuff means. The scientific methods used to achieve random samples allow polls and survey results to be used to define the public viewpoint and try to predict political outcomes. So if a surveyor or pollster achieves a sample that is as closely representative of the average population as possible, they can use that poll to make predictions about like elections and viewpoints, things like that. Non-response bias, when some people don't answer a poll. Since pollsters can't force people to answer questions, results of polls often miss a large group of people that the surveyors wanted answers from. If you think about it, mostly people who are like older and elderly, they don't really want to answer their phones or answer random people calling them on their phones. So like phone polls or text polls or website polls, they often miss a large part of like the older population. Benchmark polls provide baseline information. These are often used before the start of an election cycle to measure where the public stands before a race. Tracking polls, I think these polls are like the most useful and the most beneficial towards like news media stuff. They show changes during an election cycle. These provide information for how events have changed the course of public opinion. So as an election goes on, polls change, and that's why tracking polls are so important. Exit polls reflect opinions on voting day. These are widely covered by news outlets on election day, trying to predict election results before the votes are counted. So when you hear news media people on election day that call certain states for a certain candidate, these are largely based on exit polls, polling people coming out of the voting booth, and if there's a large percentage of a certain party and there's not that many votes left to count, states will get called by the media. Push polls bias polls to one side. They are used maliciously by biased news outlets to reflect inaccurate information and to push an agenda. So if a news media wants to promote a certain viewpoint on a certain issue, they will try and make a push poll that says that like 90% of people support a certain view on an issue in order to gain more people to just join the crowd and support the issue. Rational ignorance, justifying refraining from being educated on politics. Citizens justify their ill-informed state by outlining that the cost of becoming educated outweighs their personal benefit from politics. A lot of people feel very disconnected from politics, and because there's so many complicated news sources and so much bias in the news and how you navigate like the ways to get accurate information, it's a lot of effort to people who just want to live their lives, and that's why a lot of people are mostly ignorant about politics. Online processing, adjusting opinion based on constant new information. Instead of people actually researching issues and topics, they rely on whatever the newest information or trend to form their opinion. Online processing this issue with people's political opinions are like, this is even more important now with social media. You can scroll on Twitter and your views adjust to every single post that you see, or the same thing goes with like Instagram. The new trends that hit the stories, that just changes people's opinions, and this isn't really the best way to form really deeply rooted political opinions and with actual factual bases. Opinion leaders, popular political pundits, they hold immense power in forming the public opinion, as many people trust them to give them political news. This is a little bit lesser of a thing now, with more independent news sources using like YouTube and other social media platforms. However, there are still very famous people like on CBS or CNN or Fox, and people trust them to give them news, and most of the time people who watch mainstream media will follow the opinions of the pundits. Collective action problems that surround a collective good, they serve as the basis for how interest groups are formed. So the reason why interest groups pop up is because they rally around a certain issue, and this issue most likely affects a lot of people, because that is the best way for the interest groups to gain a lot of attention and a lot of members. Free riders, people who benefit from problems being solved without contributing. These people plague interest groups that surround large issues. People can reap the benefits without helping the interest group. So essentially, if the issue the interest group is targeting is a very broad and large issue, people don't necessarily have to participate in the interest group or try to get things done to reap the benefits when the interest group is successful. And this is a natural problem for interest groups that challenges the groups to put out more incentives to get people to join other than just having the issue be solved successfully. Selective incentives, benefits for membership. This system is the main way for interest groups to attract members, donors, and contributors. Again, this is how interest groups attract members and solve the free rider problem. Material benefits, tangible rewards. They provide physical items that keep people involved in the interest group. This isn't money, because then it would just be like basically being an employee, but it gives people like stickers and like bumper stickers, signs, tokens, medals, whatever it is, to allow the member of the interest group to have an item that signifies their membership. Solidary benefits, natural enjoyment and experience in participating like in the group and in politics. Interest groups want to keep their members active and involved in order to retain their support. So interest group leaders want to encourage their members to do things, participate, and they want to make members feel like they are helpful and they are participating in a positive way. Expressive benefits, the mental rewards for committing to values. Interest groups provide an opportunity for people to actively fight for their values and beliefs. For people who want to be politically active, an interest group is a very easy way to do so. And being involved in any sort of group is almost like a natural ego boost for anybody who wants to be involved in society and do things to help their community. Lobbying, influencing politicians to do things, this is what interest groups do. This is one of the main functions of interest groups. Lobbying has evolved into a large network of institutions, all aiming to influence government. So lobbying, like talking to politicians and trying to influence them, isn't actually like any type of casual thing. There are a whole interest group, there are whole lobbying networks and lobbying institutions that help interest groups lobby in the most effective ways. There's all sorts of like psychology behind lobbying and how to set up meetings in a successful way, how do you get a politician to actually do something for you. It's actually quite complicated. Economic interest groups want to economically benefit from political action. They involve mostly corporations and business associations, which can be very powerful. These economic groups often have access to the most resources, or at least more resources compared to other type of interest groups, because they are backed by businesses and corporations with large amounts of money. Equal opportunity interest groups tailored to civil rights issues. They advocate for moral issues, which can be incredibly effective in getting people involved. These interest groups fight things like racism, gender inequality, homophobia, things like that. Public interest groups try to benefit the entire populace. They surround larger issues that are not only beneficial to their members. The most popular and notable type of interest groups are public interest groups. The only ones you're really going to encounter in the AP Gov textbooks, whatever you're reading, if it's keeping the republic or something else, are public interest groups, because those are the ones that really matter the most. Government interest groups represent smaller or foreign governments. They help other governments try to influence the national government to better relations or give resources. So there could be some interest groups on behalf of state governments, local governments, or a collective group of foreign governments. For example, you could have a group of people from the Middle East who are advocating for some type of oil thing. Direct lobbying, actual contact with politicians, it can be very influential depending on the conversation that takes place. There are rules behind direct action. So this type of direct contact, direct talking to politicians is very powerful, but there are rules and regulations. For example, you can't just go up to a politician, give them like $1,500 and then ask for some type of political action. That's not allowed. There's actually a funny rule where you can't even take someone out to lunch and like buy them a burger or something, because that would technically be buying something for them or giving them money or bribing them. There's all these weird technicalities when it comes to direct lobbying. Indirect lobbying, creating public pressure. The voices of the public putting pressure on the government as a whole can be very effective in getting people in government to take action. So interest groups can try and rally support, especially now on like social media, to put pressure on politicians to respond. In this way, they can influence politicians without actually having to go to them and talk to them directly. Revolving door system of public officials becoming lobbyists. Since former public officials have the most knowledge of government, lobbying firms want to hire them, which can lead to improved results, but also corruption. There are some rules and regulations surrounding hiring public officials to become lobbyists directly out of their office. However, even if there's some sort of like grace period or something, it's still very powerful, because oftentimes public officials who become lobbyists, even if it takes a few years to become a lobbyist, they still know a lot about who is in government and how they can influence them. Grassroots lobbying done by the people, for the people. This type of lobbying is hard to grow, however the benefits are great for the people if they are successful. So this type of lobbying starts with a low amount of resources, it usually starts in a local area, but if it can grow, gain members, it becomes very powerful, because not only do they grow in size, but they also have the morality on their side of being that grassroots group. AstroTurf lobbying done by elites and has elite interests in mind. It is unfortunately the most effective form of lobbying, because elites have access to the most resources. This is another reason why economic interest groups are very powerful, because they are this AstroTurf lobbying type thing. They have the most resources, the most money to get on the ground and influence people. Narrowcasting, appealing to certain groups of people. Most news stations appeal very obviously to one side of the political aisle in order to retain a consistent audience base. For example, Fox News is pretty obviously a right-wing news source, and CNN or MSNBC is pretty obviously a left-wing news source. This need to retain an audience base basically makes cable news sources biased towards one side. There isn't really any cable news source that's completely objective. Most established news sources that aim to be objective, like, I don't know, NPR maybe, pretty quickly fall out of relevancy and no one really cares about them, because people always want to have polarized news because it's the most entertaining and it has the most breaking news stories. News organizations establish news outlets with multiple areas on the internet. These news sources are more powerful because they push out information on multiple platforms and through multiple ways. The news sources that show up the most in your life have the most influence over controlling the narrative. So news outlets with more resources that have access to YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, cable news, all spheres of news information and how news gets spread, they have the most control over the narrative because they can push out the most information. News aggregators, websites that pull together information from multiple news sources, they serve as a great way for people to get unbiased perspectives by being able to look at different news sources more efficiently. There are a few really good websites out there that have great algorithms for sorting different types of news sources and for, rating news sources and for providing different sides of different, topics when you look through their website. There are a few really great objective news sources like this. Gatekeepers, people who control the media. Individual owners and corporate bodies have a lot of influence over what, if, and how information is spread. So the people at the top of certain networks, like the people at the top of, I don't know, Disney, the people at the top of, I don't really know the large, conglomerate companies that control the media, but those people push their views down through their companies because at the end of the day, they're the owners, so they control the direction that the company takes. So you can imagine that people at the head of Fox are probably pretty conservative, and people at the head of CNN are probably pretty left-wing. And these corporate conglomerates and the individuals that sit on the boards of these big companies, they have the most control over the narrative. Commercial bias, reporting the news that brings the most attention. News companies need viewers to bring in the most profit, so they only want to report news they know will get the most attention. Oftentimes, this results in the news only covering, one really hot issue for the longest time, and a lot of other issues don't get any attention. Or they tend to cover issues that get a lot of, interest, but they're not actually really important to, the country or politics. But because news outlets rely on clicks and views for their money, they have the incentive to report on things that don't always actually mean the most importance to, political life or social life. Clickbait, fake information that attracts the audience. News outlets have an incentive to fake, dramatize, or exaggerate headlines to get people to consume their news. Clickbait is often a term used in the YouTube sense when people talk about thumbnails and titles, but it's definitely a real thing when it comes to news sources and news outlets. A lot of news outlets will put misleading headlines on their articles, or they'll put misleading pictures at the top of their website homepage or something to get people to click on articles. This has a negative effect on people who are consuming the news because if you don't actually click on the article and you just read the headline, you could get easily misinformed, and there are a lot of people that scroll through news sources that just read headlines. Pundits, most popular reporters. These people are looked to by the most people for news stories. They have immense control over the media narrative. The famous talking heads, as you might hear them called, they have that influence over people because people trust them for their news sources because they're famous people. And they have a lot of control over what gets spread out because if they're the most popular people putting out the news, they're putting out the news for the most amount of people. So for example, you have someone like Tucker Carlson, although he no longer works for Fox, and then maybe someone on MSNBC, I'm trying to think Rachel Maddow maybe, or Anderson Cooper, people that are really popular in political life and in the news. These people have a lot of control over what news is spread. Agenda setting, the media establishes which issues are important. Depending on what news stories media outlets give their time to, some issues become more notable and important than others. So if news sources are constantly covering one specific issue, or they're putting a lot of attention towards one issue, naturally the people watching the news will put importance on that issue too. That's why a lot of liberal news outlets will put more time to stories that benefit their side, or more conservative news outlets will put more time to stories that benefit their side, because if they keep pushing a specific story, the people who watch the news will think that story is really important. Framing, affecting the appearance of a story or issue. News outlets can give a story a specific spin in order to get people to believe a certain way about a story from the beginning. This kind of ties back to clickbait, although framing is almost more in what people actually are saying on the TV, when you watch breaking news or something like that. If you initially cover a story with a specific spin on the day that it breaks, it's pretty hard for people to break that narrative as the story keeps unfolding. The original narrative is really strong and oftentimes holds place throughout an entire, story's lifeline. Horse race journalism, story breaking is more important than credibility. Since news outlets make money based on views and clicks, they always want to be the first to break a major story regardless of the facts and credibility. The news outlet that breaks the story first will get the most clicks when the story breaks, and they'll get cited as a source when the story keeps, unfolding, and that brings the most attention to their news site. But this can oftentimes make news outlets want to rush to put the story out on their website or on the TV before all the facts come out. When I think of horse race journalism, I think of TMZ. They're always rushing to get a lot of these stories out. They seem to be always the first news outlet to get on, really popular and notable stories. Even though they are actually pretty good and a lot of the stuff that they break is true, there are some times where TMZ has to walk stuff back because they're so quick to put out stuff that they find that sometimes they have to walk it back because it's just not credible, and the things they put out end up being untrue. Optics, how something initially looks or feels. Oftentimes, the feeling that a certain situation or story gives off is more important than the facts behind it. Optics are a huge thing. When I think of optics, I think specifically of someone like Joe Biden. When Joe Biden spoke or was on the TV, he wasn't always the most best looking, best appearing. The way he would sound when he talked wasn't always the best. So a lot of people would end up ignoring what he actually said or the facts behind what he's actually talking about and just basically say, oh my god, look how bad he is up on the stage. Whatever he's saying must also be bad. And this can also be the same way with someone like Trump. Trump comes off as really rough and really angry sometimes, and a lot of people will ignore what he's actually saying just because the optics of him just being up on that stage and talking a lot of the time is really bad. And that's why optics are really important. Sound bites, clips of people talking. Small quotes can be heavily manipulated by the news media. They are often scrutinized by media outlets more than specific facts. A lot of times when you watch cable news shows, most of the stuff they put on the screen are just quotes, and most of the videos they play are just little sound bites of politicians. Not a lot of what they actually report on is real facts, real on-the-ground stuff, and that's why sound bites play a large role in the news and why they're often spun and swayed to certain ways. Feeding frenzies, issues that attract a lot of attention. These stories can become overblown and overcovered, hurting the credibility of the story and blinding people from more important issues. Sometimes issues that are overcovered are actually really important, but a lot of times there'll be issues that just have a lot of drama around them or have a lot of nosiness and attention around them, but they aren't actually that important, and these become huge stories for media outlets to cover. However, if a feeding frenzy just continues for the longest time, stories that really matter can just get ignored. Selective perception, only watching what one agrees with. Most people practice selective perception, leading to people establishing media echo chambers around themselves, not taking in a wide variety of viewpoints. It's just a fact that most people who watch CNN are left-wing and most people that watch Fox are right-wing. People tend to want to hear what they want to hear, you know what I mean? So people will watch what they agree with because they always want to have their own side vindicated rather than have their side challenged. Think about it, when you're watching news late at night on your couch, you don't really want to watch something that's going to challenge you. You just want to watch something that's just going to, just something have in the background, but something that will always agree with you. That's why, from what I said earlier, news aggregators are so important because they actually make people get their views challenged when they read the news. Because if you go on sites like those, you always have differing sides. Permanent campaign, politicians always exhibit campaign behavior. In order to appeal to the media, politicians are always doing typical campaign behaviors, even when not in an election cycle. So if you think about how the news operates, the news, when it comes to more popular and notable politicians, they're always scrutinizing them, they're always attacking them, they're always analyzing them. A part of a politician's everyday life is refuting bad claims made about them and always arguing for their side and why they are a good person to be in office. And even though they aren't technically campaigning when they say that stuff, they basically are. There are like campaign behaviors. So because the media is so nosy almost, and they're always attacking and looking for weaknesses in politicians are almost always arguing for them, and they're almost always campaigning even when they're not in an election cycle. News management, influencing and spinning the media to one side. A politician and their staff do a lot of work to make sure news outlets are being favorable to them. A politician's staff is always doing PR stuff, and they're always trying to manage the media, and they're always doing damage control when a politician messes up. A huge part of a politician's staff is making sure their image stays favorable, and this has a lot to do with how the media covers them. Trial balloon, leak stories that show how the public will react to certain issues. Some politicians or people in government will intentionally leak information. The reason I'm using the quotes is because leak is fake. They just intentionally do it in order to see how the public will react to a certain action. What I remember the most when it comes to trial balloon is the Roe v. Wade case. There was a leak that came out that spread the court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade well before they actually decided on the case and it went public. And it came out pretty soon after that it was most likely that this leak was intentionally done by someone in the office just to get an assessment of the public's reaction to the overturning of the case before the court actually did it. Political accountability, politicians taking responsibility for their actions. Because a lot of the media is about storytelling, politicians spend more time attacking media outlets and how they cover stories rather than taking responsibility for the events actually being reported. When I think of this, I think of someone like Trump. Trump constantly accuses the news of being fake and accuses certain reporters of having a bad agenda towards him. And this is just an example of the declining political accountability because of the expanding news. Because the news has so much power over how people view politicians, politicians will spend a lot of time attacking the news and how they're covering them rather than what they're actually saying and refuting the facts that they're actually reporting. Citizen journalism, people conduct independent news every day. In the modern age, citizen journalism is incredibly empowered due to the popularization of social media sites and the internet as a whole. This kind of whole started with Drudge Report, I guess, when the internet first started, where it was just a guy reporting news on a website. And now with sites like Twitter and Instagram, people are entitled to spread videos and facts and things that they discovered, whenever they want. They don't have to be part of like a cable news network to spread the news. They can just tweet it out and people know, and it can become a story. And that is actually an incredibly good thing because it expands the right to free speech and free press. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next unit, and goodbye. Yo, if you're super cool and awesome, you should follow my Twitter or X if you're that kind of person. It's at Clark4724. I post a lot of random stuff on there, but I also post channel updates and when my next videos are coming out. So if you're gonna keep watching my channel, then I recommend you follow, and thanks.